Hey guys, welcome back to Simplified Gardening and today's live stream, which is about proven strategies to have a successful garden this year. And with that, we're going to be talking about everything about garden prep and what we can do to make our lives easier later on in the year. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we go. At the top of the chat where it says top chat or live chat, there's also a Q&A section there. So if you go there, put your questions in there and I'll be able to make it much easier for me to see those questions. Okay, if I'm looking over here, it's because I'm looking at another screen. In fact, if I show you what I'm looking at, I'm looking at this screen here, guys. So if I am looking away, that's the reason why. Okay, so I just want you to know I'm not being rude, but I'm just trying to get your questions and things like that. So it's great to see so many of you here. I've been watching the chat. In the first sort of 10 minutes that goes on, that's just my time in order to make sure I've copied across all of the things so the chat works and everything else. So I don't tend to talk a lot in that, but what it does allow me to do is just to see what you guys have been chatting on, and it's great to see so many people here and some people who haven't been here for a little while. It's brilliant. Hi Jay as well, thanks for coming back. Loads and loads of people. One thing before we go on, you'll notice there's a support me at coffee.com at the bottom of the screen. That's thanks to Pam because she came on to me yesterday. Now, you guys know I've tried doing Patreon and some other ways for you to support, but they just take such a big wedge of it. It isn't really worth it for all the extra effort. And I also found that people were getting upset that the likes of YouTube and Patreon take such a big cut of things. So when they were then trying to help Simplify Gardening and myself, then they weren't happy that certain money that they were giving was going off to these charities. Coffee doesn't work like that, so there's no fees, which is brilliant. So if you want to support us, there's a link in the description below, or you can just type what it says on the screen there. Right. So guys, today, like I said, we're going to be talking about planning, preparing and everything else to do with our gardens. So bring your questions across. I've got a couple because I did put a post on one of the Facebook pages, and a few people have put some questions through. But I want to be able to first off talk about what's the importance of prepping and planning. We've got such really crappy weather, and I mean it's rained here since practically November, bar the few cold days we had, and I was in work for those. But prep is so important in the garden, and I don't mean just to get the garden looking nice. The work that you do now is going to save you hours and hours of work later. Just for example, just by mulching some of the beds, that will save you weeks of watering because it just helps to hold that moisture in the ground. So get your questions across. We've got a couple coming in and we're going to bring up some of those now. So the first question coming in at the moment comes from Michael Lindsay, and that is dig or no dig. So for me, Michael, I prefer to grow no dig. And why would I want to build, really good quality compost to bring all the microorganisms and the soil biota back into my soils and then go and destroy it by digging it? Now, I'm not adverse to digging, and I think that's quite important to understand. Once my garden bed is done and prepared, I don't really want to dig it at that point because the work I put into it, excuse me, the work I'm putting into it, I don't want to undo all of that good effort. But if I had an area that was really plastered in something like bindweed or something like that, I'm not adverse to digging that out first, because I think that although you can smother it, it's a long drawn process. And I'd rather just dig out as much as I can before building the bed. So I'm not adverse to digging. I try not to dig for the simple reason being is I find that Number one, it's not great for my back. Most of you will know, if you've been around the channel for any length of time, I've had a double knee operation and a back operation because of work, basically. Okay, and so anything I can do to protect my back and my knees, I tend to do. Some of you will have noticed me kneeling on a cushion in the garden off a sofa. That's because I'm protecting my knees, after the operation. And again, like with the back now, when I came to this garden, I started growing in beds, in the ground. And, as time goes on, that's going to get harder and harder. So now I'm starting to build the raised beds back like I had before, and we'll start getting them. So that's why we've had the raised beds from Epic Gardening and stuff like that, and we've built the others. Eventually, the whole of the site will go back over to raised beds. Francis, thank you very much for your donation. I really appreciate you supporting Simplified Gardening. That will go to helping fund us to continue making more good content for you. So let's get on to the next message. Any advice on keeping puppies out of the garden besides fences? This is difficult. Like, fences, are a barrier, really. There are things that you can do that like have a tag on the dog's collar, and they're like little sort of little sensors that set off a high-pitched noise that only dogs can hear, and they don't like it, so they turn away from it. I haven't found them to be that effective, but really, fences are probably, if it's your dog, if it's anybody else as well, there's all sorts of other ways, but I won't go into them on a family-friendly garden channel. But no, I mean, if it was my garden and I didn't want my dog there, I'd be putting up some form of fence. Okay. Guys, if we just keep the question section to just questions rather than saying hello and statements and things like that, because otherwise I end up having to scroll through, and then that just really takes out stuff from the chat, So what's the best way to avoid weeds? My garden last year was overrun. Brandon, the first things first, okay, with weeds is that it's a game of constantly pulling weeds as they come. Now, your best friend will be a garden hoe, and this is going to mean that maybe 10 minutes of every time you're in your garden that you just go around and just hoe a little bit of the weeds as they're coming through, because let me tell you, they're much easier to deal with when they're like this than when we've got a dandelion like that and a root system twice as large. Okay, so the first things first is hoe them off on a regular basis. Mulching will really help with cutting down the light, which will stop the seed germinating, and then it's easier to take some through. Now, mulching can be in loads of different forms. It can be, down to sheet mulches like cardboard or something like that, or Terran, or whatever you want to use. You could go down the wood chip route. You can go down even small pebbles, rocks. It really depends at what section of your garden you're actually wanting to cut the weeds down. But the biggest thing that you need to make sure that never happens is that those weeds go to seed, because that's just compounding the problem. But there's lots of different ways, but mulching and hoeing is going to be your best friends. So take those 10 minutes. It will save you hours and hours and hours later on in the year. So Holly's asking, how do I prevent blight during tomato season? So Holly, first things first, and this also comes into the garden prep as well. Know where you're going to be planting your tomatoes. Work out how many plants you need, and then if you're going to water, either follow one of the videos that I did where I sank 2-litre pop bottles next to the plant so I could water into the pop bottle, which keeps the surface of the soil dry, or into the tomato halo, something like that. Or if you're going to run some sort of drip irrigation, okay? If you are watering with a can, you need to make sure you don't get the leaves wet. So water at soil level only. So that's as far as the prep goes. put a good compost layer on top of your soil. That will dry much quicker and will prevent the blight spores from rising. And now we know blight is on the wind as well, so it's really important to allow really good spacing for your plants. I haven't had blight in probably 15 years, and that's because I allow plenty of space and good airflow. And if you have that, blight can't take over. Keep the leaves dry and you're golden, and you won't catch blight. And incidentally, last year the garden to the left and the right of me both lost their tomatoes to blight, and I wasn't affected at all because of that airflow. Okay guys, so Jason's asking, my prize outdoor cordelines are looking dead and the leaves have flopped over. What can I do to save them? We've had a smashing with the winds and stuff this year. Cordelines will take a bashing. But like any other plant, you can strip those leaves back. It's not going to look pretty to do it, but they will push more. And I'm not telling you to cut the top off the plant, okay? But all the leaves that are looking pretty dodgy, you can strip them back. And as long as you leave 4 or 5 leaves on the top of the cordyline, it will push more out. It'll just mean the plant gets a little bit taller, because effectively that's what happens with cordylines. They grow up the stem and leaves fall off the bottom as they push out the top. So just, you can strip off the really ropey leaves and just leave the rest. Make sure you've got enough for the plant to photosynthesize. Other than that, next year maybe consider putting up some sort of wind barrier so that they don't get hammered. Okay, the impatient gardener, can no dig work with SFG without being a raised bed? I think so. I think no dig will work wherever you are, whatever soils you've got. I've seen a farm that's been turned over completely. The whole farm was turned over completely to no dig. And for a farm, you'd think, bloody hell, how do they do that? But what they found was they were putting down huge amounts of compost. Then they were feeding with like compost teas to bring in the microbial life, and they found within about 3 years the microbial life had gone down into that soil, subsoils below, and they were pulling all them nutrients down there, and this soil was better. They were getting better crops than the farms next to them, and all sorts. So I think no dig can work pretty much anywhere. There may be a bit of a trade-off initially when you start with no dig, and it's just a case of seeing that through, pulling weeds, making sure that you're not losing all of the nitrogen and things like that. But once that equilibrium establishes, I think that you'll have a really good garden. I mean, after all, guys, look at Charles Dowden. He's got a fantastic garden, and every single year he pulls out great crops from it, and he's totally no dig, so yeah, I think it can work pretty much anywhere. But like I said, I'm not adverse to digging. I will if I need to, but I try not to. Holly's asking, what options or organic pesticides can I use to prevent pests from eating my leafy greens and above ground growing vegetables? So first things first, Holly, is make sure that your plants are as healthy as possible. And when I say that, this goes all the way from the planning stage. When you're sowing your seed, you need to move that seedling on into the next pot before it checks the plant. Because if the plant checks at any time, that causes stress on the plant, which then makes it easier for pests and things to to attack them and stuff. The pests don't tend to attack healthy plants, okay? The other option you've got is, we spoke about it a little bit last week with companion planting. You can use something, some other form of plant that will help, the pests may need, would rather go to that. Nasturtiums come to mind. They, the pest species tend to like them more because they grow so fast. They have a lot of really lush growth. Slugs love them as well. So there's various ways. For slugs, there's traps, beer traps. You can do all of that. You can buy these blue pellets that are organic. You can buy the wool that's organic. There's lots of different options available to you. Netting will help against birds and things like that. It really depends on what sort of pests you're talking about. And if we're only talking about the slugs and stuff like that, well, there's various options, and we've got tons of videos on the channel about that as well. Okay. So Ruth's asking how we can prepare the greenhouse. First things first with greenhouses, guys, light is important. So at this time of year, before you start really filling it out with seeds and everything else, give the greenhouse a good clean. Get something called Algon if you can get it in your country. If not, there'll be some form of it. And that will allow you to clean the glass, the polystyrene, the plastic, whatever it is that your greenhouse is made from, and it will get in there. It'll kill all of the spores and any pests that hide in the red spider mites and things like that. Give it a really good clean. That will let the light in firstly, which will help your plants to grow much better. It's a perfect time to firstly do a soil test on your beds, and we'll be talking about that in a moment. But do a soil test on your beds so that you can understand where your bed is at. So take a couple of samples of soil. Now you can do it at home if you get a soil testing kit from Amazon or somewhere, or you can send it off to a lab. And I've got an article on my website with a list of like 10 labs in the USA and 10 labs in the UK that you can get these soil tests at. And I think there's 5 labs in Australia. But if you go to my website and just type in soil test into the search bar, you'll find that, and it'll talk you all through that. Once you know if your soil is lacking anything, then you can amend it. Now, a good amendment would be compost anyway, but we're going to be talking about pH and things like that. It depends what you want to be growing. So if your soil is too alkaline, you can use sulfur to bring it down, and if it's too acidic, you can use lime to bring it up. There's lots of different things that you can do, but good layer of compost around about 4 inches will be fine. Just stick it on the top and make sure those beds are watered. Now, what we're looking to do here is get the microbial activity and the worms and everything back into that soil, because no doubt most people don't water their soil through the winter in the greenhouses, so it's possibly dried out. So get that soil really saturated, get some compost on the top of it, and that's going to really do you well. Then the next thing then is start thinking about what you're going to be growing in there, where you're going to be growing it, and put the support system in place early, because that should be in before the plants. Putting a support, just for argument's sake, now we plant a tomato plant that's this big, that's great. It does need a support system at that point. But as it gets bigger, it needs a support system. And then we go and drive a cane right through the root system, because they will spread out their roots quite well. And if you're damaging those root systems as you push that cane in, then it's going to cause that plant to check and then be stressed, and that's when disease and stuff takes over. So get the support systems in place, however you're doing it, whether it's a trellis work or it's hanging strings or whatever the case be, and get all of that done. Figure out what your watering regime is going to be. If you're going to do it by hand, have you got a couple of barrels that you can put in there that's going to keep water warmer, those sorts of things. Or if you're going to put drip irrigation, well, that all needs laying out before the plants are ready to go in. Consider areas for sowing. Tidy up all your pots and things, have them ready, and have a good prep area so that you can do your sowing and your planting on, because invariably we don't want to be doing that outside. So you'll likely have a small dedicated table or something like that in your greenhouse ready to do all the sowings. Stack all of the plants on shelving and things like that to get them going, and then you can move that out as and when you want to put your plants in the ground. Right, I hope that's helped you with that. And this one from Holly is about the greenhouse as well. So the only difference here, Holly, about what can go in it, greenhouses and polytunnels and things like that, yeah, undercover growing, it's valuable space. Okay, it's protected from the wind and the rain and the snow and whatever else we get at that time. And I remember one summer we had a hailstorm here, and they were coming down like golf balls. They were huge, and it just absolutely destroyed most of the outside stuff. So, it's valuable growing space. So consider the crops that either need heat or you want to protect or are expensive to buy, and those are the things that you want to do. So tomatoes, chilies, peppers, cucumbers, your basils, if you want to put them inside. You can put high valued greens in there, those sorts of things. And just be mindful how much space you have to keep the airflow going, because plants get big. And what a lot of people do is they plant out a tunnel because, with a plant that's this size, and they think, wow, great, they've given me plenty of space, not thinking about the mature size of the plant. So a greenhouse should look really bare when you first plant it out, but of course then by summer it's full, but it's still got that airflow. Okay, right guys, so I'm going to just have a little drink, if you don't mind. So in the live chat, what are you guys doing for prep yourself this year? Let's get some questions in the live chat going. Not questions, but what are you doing? The tasks you're doing at the moment, and what are you pruning? What are you sowing? Anything that you're doing at the moment. Let's get that in the live chat while I'm going through some of these questions. So the next question we have comes from Pam. Oops, I'm going to have to go back here for a moment, because this is the only screen that allows me to pull these in. When's the best time of year to test your soil? Pam, this is perfect timing now, just before you want to grow in that bed, okay? But ideally, you should test your soil at least once a year. I would do it now, so that you can prepare your beds over the next few weeks, because what happens is you're going to amend your bed, and that takes time then for those amendments to actually spread throughout the soils and to sort of for the levels to get right. You can't just go, right, I'm going to add sulfur today just to bring the pH down, but expect it to be okay by the next day. It doesn't happen like that. It's a gradual thing. So what you want to do is get the amendments, do the test, get the amendments on to allow it to go through. I don't recommend doing it in the autumn or just before winter. And the reason for that is, unless you're putting a really good thick layer of compost on the soil over winter, or you're putting a green manure to grow there, most of those nutrients that you will have mended the bed in will be washed out by the winter rain. So a green manure is good, because what happens with some green manures is they take those nutrients up and they lock it in their root system. And then when you cull that green manure and either allow the roots to rot back down naturally and take the top growth away, or leave the top growth as a cut and drop, well, those nutrients will go back into that soil. So it's a good way of protecting nutrients. But if your ground has been relatively bare over winter, now's the time to do it, and it's a good time to do it. Okay, put a good layer of compost down. Think about what it's doing. Now, a home soil test is only going to give you so much information. Usually they give you pH. They'll tell you what your sort of nitrogen, your potassium, your phosphorus is like, okay? And that's pretty much the 4 things you're going to get out of a home test. But if you send your soil sample away, like I said, I've got a blog showing you exactly how to do that. You will have a complete breakdown of every sort of mineral and everything that's missing out of your soil. But not only that, it does an analysis of the soil. So say for argument's sake, it tells you you're low on nitrogen. It'll tell you how much you're low per sort of meter and what you need to do in order to bring it back up to the proper levels for each of those things. And even cobalt and things like that, it will cover absolutely everything. There is a fee for that, obviously. The last time I done it was about £20, so it's around, I don't know, $26 or something like that. But that is well worth it. Now, what I tend to do is I'll do one of those tests. I'll send away with one of those tests every 3 years, and then I'll just use a home testing kit for 2 years in between, because once I get my soil right, then you're only really playing with the 4 or 5 main things. But every 3 years, then I'll do another sort of lab test just to be able to see exactly where I'm at. Okay. How many collar would you suggest to grow carrots? Sorry, Anne, can you explain what you mean by that? Because I'm not getting that. Or if someone knows, chuck it straight in the live chat and I'll answer it now. But I don't get what Anne is on about there. I'm sorry. Holly, how do you prevent squash? Is that squash bugs, or I don't get that either. Can you explain that for me? What's your favourite plant for undersowing tomatoes? It's got to be basil. But not just any basil. Last year I sowed a very miniature leaf basil. It was tiny, but do you know, that thing gave off such a perfume, and it was stunning. And the great thing was, it sort of blended into like the tomato sauces and things that I had. There wasn't this big swathe of green in there, but it still put the flavour in, and that's fantastic if you've got kids who don't like seeing that huge amounts of greens. They're okay with flecks of green, but when you've got a big basil leaf in a tomato sauce, which I tend to like, they don't. So this was a perfect way of doing that. Basil's fantastic for undersowing. Some chilies are really good for undersowing with tomatoes, although they do like it a little drier than tomatoes. I've grown them in the same bed for years, no problems at all. There is a bit of a trade-off with the yield that you'll have. But if I was growing for quality and quantity and everything, I'd be growing those in containers, the chilies. But there's so much. I mean, you could grow cucumbers underneath them, believe it or not, and just let them sprawl along the floor, because at the end of the day, they're a sprawling plant as well. There's so much you could do. But for me, I tend to get like things, shorter plants, things like basils and some other herbs and things like that in there, that don't mind the heat. You'll have seen the herb bed that I built last year for the sages and stuff. That's all out there outside. But those summer loving herbs, they're fantastic for chucking in around tomatoes and things like that. So Holly's saying, how do I prevent squash bugs? Again, Holly, squash bugs are a right pain. The main thing that you could do, depending what it is, would be to net with something like an EnviroMesh. That would prevent them getting on there. But if you're not going to use a mesh like that, and you start to see squash bugs, the best thing you can do is pick them straight away. So if you see one, go through all of your plants and pull off any that you can find, because once they start, they will go mental and you'll be pulling them forever. But I mean, and they're big enough that you can literally just pick them off, put them in a bucket of water or whatever it is you want to do with them, and you can deal with that. But what a lot of people do is they don't check the underneath the leaves or on the stems of whatever plant it is, and they'll hide in the little crook of the leaf stem. So you need to get down and have a good look through the plants properly. But a veggie mesh, something like that, would be a good bet to stop them. Jay, great to see you back on, pal. Any special tips to deal with Japanese beetles on my climbing beans? Yeah, Jay. Japanese beetles. I've got a whole article on that again on the website, which really goes in depth. Um, Again, these are a right pest to deal with, and you've got to catch them early because once they're there, they're like squash bugs. They just go nuts, and they're very hard to get rid of. Um, it's not possible to be netting beans, but one of the things that will work well with them is a garlic spray. So if you want to spray grind up some garlic in water, you know, or infuse it in some boiling water and then mix out with some normal water and just spray the bean plants. That can really deter them. So that will help with that. But get across to the website, just type in Japanese beetle into the search of the website and you'll find the article. And, I think it's a 2,500 word article all on preventing Japanese beetle. DN, what's your favourite thing to go? Guys, put in the live chat what my favourite thing to grow is for DN. Because if you don't know by now, you haven't been watching the channel long enough. DN, my most favourite thing to grow is potatoes. Okay, I absolutely love the fact that you can put these little tubers into, the ground or into a bucket, a container, whatever it is, and then you can harvest, kilos and kilos of food. That is really versatile. It's a staple for a lot of people's homes and things like that. You can do so much with it. And for me, it's just like Christmas. You're pulling out those little red or white jewels out of the soil, after, what is it, 4 or 5 months of growing, and you think, yeah, I done it right this year. Last year, I didn't do it so right, but that was because I was testing these peat-free composts. But again, each year is a new year, and as you can see in the live chat now, everybody's telling you potatoes because that's one thing that I do definitely love growing. But to be honest with you, I just love growing, and it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's potatoes, or let me just change camera a second here, or whether or not it's all of this sort of stuff. I got plants everywhere in here. It really doesn't matter what it is. um, I'm just happy growing, and that's something that has been instilled in me since I was 7 years old with my grandfather. For those of you that know the story, he sort of had me on his allotment picking the gooseberries and everything else. I used to get thorns in my fingers, but it was some of the best times of my life, and that has sort of been ingrained in me for the last like 40 odd years. And so it doesn't really matter what it is. I'm happy just growing, but my most favorite thing is potatoes. That was a very long answer for that. All right. Okay, Tony, raised beds are great, cost effective. Not today. Lasagna garden, great idea, but it's on the ground. I'm thinking middle ground, mound rows. Your thoughts, advice on, and how deep? KP, yeah. Look, nothing's cheap these days. Doesn't matter where it is. Even breathing is costing us a fortune. So, look, it is what it is. But when you consider this is my hobby, and it's your guys' hobby, and I don't really have that many vices. So, like, I'll have a drink now and then, you know, and I work hard. So if I want to spend my money on the garden, then that's what I'll do, okay? But that's me, and I understand and I appreciate not everybody is happy to spend money on a garden, or they can't spend money on their garden, okay? Now, you know, when you look at Germany, things with like hugelkultur, they built huge mounds of all the waste that they could find. They carried it over in soil and they grew crops on that. And those things were like 4 and 5 feet high. You know, you could do something similar at 2 feet high, at 3 feet high. You just mound it over with soil and grow in that. You know, raised beds, you could literally just raise the bed with soil. It doesn't have to have sides. We've spoken about this in the raised bed live stream. You know, a raised bed is anything that's above the native soil level. So if you want to just build a big mound in the middle of a garden, that's a raised bed. Just because it doesn't have sides doesn't matter, right? So you just got to think about the quality of the things that you're putting in it. Now, you know, if you're going to be sticking in hardwood logs in the bottom of it, they're going to take 20 years to break down. But if you can find stuff that's already pre-rotted, that's going to act like a sponge. It's going to be perfect. And in fact, the new beds I had off Kevin that I built in one of the videos, the metal steel bells, I'm going to be filling them with hugelkultur, because otherwise they would take about 2 tons of compost or soil or whatever the case being, which I don't want to be wasting. So we will build that, and we'll build the soil based around that, and that'll come up in a later video. And videos are coming, guys. I'm just raining, and for some of you who have seen the video I put out a little while ago, on my last, so I was off yesterday and today, but the 2 night shifts before that, I was helping people who had been flooded out of their homes and stuff, you know. Literally the street was just like a river where it was coming off the mountains, you know, culverts had broken, and we were, the only thing we could do for people was open their back door and their front door and let it run through. You know, I went to one house and it was like 3/4 of the way up the door, you know, the back garden, and it was pouring in through air bricks and all sorts. So you know, the videos will continue as that happens, you know, as I'm able to get up there. But I mean, the garden at the moment is just like walking on a wet sponge. It's absolutely soaking, and I don't want to be destroying the soil life within that. Okay, next question. Would building raised beds be worth it to avoid having weeds growing in them then? Use hood bags of soil for the top couple of feet. Yeah, so, you know, right. A raised bed's only as good as the people who are tending it. So if you put a raised bed on top of something like bindweed, for argument's sake, eventually that bindweed is going to work its way up through that raised bed and it'll come out the surface. You can put a terrain down like I've done on mine, but I don't have bindweed there, so it's not a problem. But you could put terrain down or some sort of barrier. But just because you've only put good soil on there, you know, if that soil, you know, is compost, it's possibly got weed seeds in it. If it's soil from, like, you know, some sort of builders merchants or whatever, you know, they put out these 10 bags of soil, that's definitely going to have weed seed in it. So, and even if it was the cleanest of soils that you could possibly get, well, you know, if they've managed to get out all of the seed out of it, then the likelihood is it's got no life. But the wind brings seed in anyway, right? So you've still got to tend those beds as if you're growing in the ground as well. It will keep you weed free for some time, but if you don't start pulling those weeds as they appear, then it's just going to drop its own seed, and then that'll be like it was in the ground beforehand, all right? So just bear that in mind. Okay. Adams, I'm considering building a permanent support system for growing climbing veg. What would you suggest using in its construction? Right. So if it's going to be a permanent thing, you're going to be looking at building some sort of pergola or trellis or whatever the case. I don't know how you're going to be doing it, whether you're going to have 2 sides and a roof so things can grow over the top. I would personally build that out of something like 4x4 posts, and then get some roofing batten and make a trellis work, very much like I did in the well-being garden, and literally trellis the sides so things can grow up there. You can put a finer mesh on that if you want to afterwards, but basically you want a strong structure. It's okay using pressure treated timber in the garden. A lot of people say, oh no, there's bad chemicals and everything like that in pressure treatments. Now they've gone away from all of the copper based things and stuff now, and the treatments that they're using are actually quite harmless, so you don't need to worry about that, and it's going to keep the longevity of the structure for you. What I would say is if you can concrete wherever your garden is, put some concrete pillars in, okay, with a post support, so that you can bolt the post to the support. That way it will keep the post up off the ground, and that'll prevent that rotting as well. If not, and you've got to put the post in the ground, make sure there's plenty of gravel around there to allow it to drain away, and maybe consider, painting the bottom of the post with, some sort of water-based sealer to prevent water sort of penetrating. But yeah, these sorts of systems, Adam, will they're great especially if you've got short on space. Growing vertically is a really good way of doing that, but just make sure it's strong, and if you've got a windy location, that it can't be blown over. That's why I suggest building like a cage type thing where you can grow underneath it and things can grow up and over it, because then you've got 4 feet rather than just a straight fence type of thing. Okay, what's the best thing to deter or eliminate slugs? Donald, the best thing I would suggest everybody do, first off, number one, get a pond or some form of water in the garden. That's going to bring in all sorts of things that eat slugs. It's going to bring in the birds, the frogs, the toads, the newts. It's going to bring in hedgehogs. All of these things will all help dent the population of slugs in your garden. So the wildlife is the important thing to bring in. But if you are adamant that you got an area, for argument's sake, you've got a lettuce bed or something like that, you want to keep slugs completely away from that, then nematodes are the way to go. And I've got a video on the channel that shows you exactly how to make your own nematodes at home, because they're expensive to buy, and that'll take you through making those nematodes, and you can just water them down and they're good for 6 weeks. So you just need to make another batch for 6 weeks time. All right, they'd be the 2 things that I would really recommend for slugs. I mean, you've got all the usual things like beer traps and things like that. They all work well, but it's after the fact, because if I was a slug, yeah, I'm thirsty, I'm going to go down a beer trap, or the yeast smell's going to track me down there. But if I'm hungry, I'm going after your lettuce first. So, think about how you want to be able to do that, right? But nematodes will definitely keep them away from there. As a new chicken owner, is it wise to let them roam the garden, or can they make a mess? Will it grow? First things first, will it grow? I don't know where you live, but if you're in the UK at the moment, chickens are on lockdown, all right? You can't let them out. But if you're not on lockdown, they can roam the garden. I would keep them away from specific areas of the garden, like lettuce beds, things like that, because they will decimate any lettuce you have going. What I tend to do with my poultry when we're not in lockdown is I will create some sort of little caged area for them. I'll throw them in there for a few hours, and I'll move that a little bit like a chicken tractor, but just made of wire, and I'll just move it across the garden, and I'll let them scratch through everything, and they'll pull out, all of the vine weevil and, all of the grubs that are in the soil, any slugs. They're fantastic at sort of culling all the slug eggs and things like that. So, but yeah, I mean, this time of year, they're perfect for putting in the garden, and I've been known to throw them in the polytunnels and let them clean those up as well for me. So, Pam, we had this question 2 weeks ago, I think, about super soil. I've not really used it. I know there's a couple of people in the chat that have used it, and maybe they'll put their comments in on it. I can't really comment on something. They seem to think it's really good stuff, but I can't comment on something I haven't used personally. It's one thing that, I understand how it works and everything else, but I've not seen the results. So you'll never see me promoting something on this channel, guys, that I've not personally had my hands on, for the simple reason being that You know, I don't want to be seen as saying one thing and then finding out later on it's something else, you know. So, while I'm here, I just want to have a chat while we're on the form of super soils and compost. For those of you that don't know, my book Composting Masterclass is available. There's links in the description below for US, UK and Australia. You can go there, but it's available in all countries. And if you can't find it online, just go to your local bookstore and ask them to order it for you, and they'll be able to order it. I put a lot of work into writing this book, guys, and the second book, while I'm on the subject, is Your First Vegetable Garden, and this has been done like a year through the garden with talking about how to get the best of all these different crop types, garden prep, which is what we're talking about today, and all sorts of stuff. And that book, I'm literally just waiting for the final files, so this book will be or should be available come March of this year. So you know, so that'll be another book, but this book will be a little bit more expensive, I think, because of the size of it. The printing costs are going to be quite substantive, so it'll be a little bit more expensive, but this will have tons and tons of information in it ready for you guys. All right, but again, the composting book is available now on Amazon already, or in most good bookstores and online elsewhere, and it's available in 4 formats. Okay, so you'll be able to get ebooks and audio books and things like that of it. So I'm just going to have a little look through some of the chat and see what you guys have been up to while I have a little drink. Graham saying it's a brilliant book. Thank you, Graham. I appreciate that. Terry saying the same thing. And guys, one thing I'd ask any of you, which would really help me out, if you've had a copy of my book, you've read a copy of it, or you've borrowed a copy, or it's been purchased for you, whatever the case being, I'd really appreciate it if you take the time and just go across to Amazon and leave a review. You don't need to own the book to do that. You just need to have been able to, you know, to have read it so that you can put an honest review across. Because reviews on Amazon really do make those books, you know, sort of come up the rankings and sell much better. So, you know, if you want to support me by doing something like that, that'd be fantastic. I'd really appreciate that as well. So Frank Barnwell's in on it. Tony, more info. Rob saying super soil's great for weeds. So, you know, guys, look, you know, when you're feeding, unless you're mulching as well, I'm suppose, you know, again, I can't really say what's, you know, what it's like, but, you know, you can only say what other people are going on, you know. Graham saying price doesn't matter as long as I'm learning. Tony, mate, thank you, Graham. I really appreciate that. Yeah, and like I said, you know, I'll give you some sort of idea. The printing costs of these books are really expensive, and most authors for their books are probably making £1 or £2 per book. That is it. So it's even, you know, you're seeing these books at £35. If it's a big book, the printing costs, you know, are huge, and pretty much 98% of the book's cost. Obviously, there's a little bit with postage and stuff like that as well involved. Simone's asking a question in the chat here. What size containers do you need to grow carrots? How long do you want your carrots, Simone? Look, you can grow carrots in those 30-litre buckets. I've successfully done that year after year. Or you can go to like a massive raised bed like I built with the steel sheeting and the timber. Those beds are for carrots, so I can grow nice, long, sweet candle carrots. So, you know, you can grow them in pretty much anything. And you can even grow the little round, stumpy ones, you know, in a tray if you wanted, you know. But obviously, the longer the carrot you want, the deeper the bed needs to be. Okay. Right. Yeah, so guys, it seems that you're doing well on chatting. Jay, thank you very much for putting the link for the book in the chat. I really appreciate that, mate. Let's have a look what else is going on. Oh, I just seen Pat's chat now. Will it grow because of bird flu? I'm assuming that's why we're on chicken lockdown at the moment. Um, yeah, bird flu in the UK is not very good at the moment, guys. It's giving us a bit of grief, and it has done for probably the last 8 years. Maybe it's been on and off the last 8 years. It's been a pain in the backside because not only do we need to keep them locked up, we need to prevent any feces from wild birds going in. We have to have biosecurity measures where we're dipping our feet in disinfectant. We can't wear the same clothes in and out of the pen, and it's just all sorts of stuff, you know. So it's not very good at the moment. Um, okay, Stephen, starting seeds in electric propagator when? Right, that's a good question, and it is dependent on multiple factors. Firstly, what are you sowing? If it's onions, things like that, well, you're going to need to start now, okay? Chilies, onions, you know, that's all going to be happening around the next few weeks. Onions have already been sown. But with those, you're just going to germinate them and then you're going to get them out of there, okay? The bulk of things are going to be February, March. But with the cost of electricity at the moment, you know, a lot of gardeners are holding back a little bit because the least amount of time that has to be running, the better. I mean, for me, it's not going to be so much of a problem very shortly because I'm about to have a pretty big solar system installed on the 1st of February, which will cut my energy costs quite drastically because, as you can imagine, in here all day with all these lights on and stuff, it does, you know, sort of add up, you know. But it really depends on what you're growing, when you're growing it, whether or not you can afford to pay for the extra electricity it takes, you know, because once you sow early, you've got to have lighting to go with that then to keep those plants moving on. This is what I was on about earlier on about checking plants, because as they grow, you can't hold them back in pots. They're going to need to be potted up into a bigger pot until they can go out. Because if you do, you check that plant, it becomes a weak plant and then pests take over, all right? So just consider those few factors. Michael Lindsay, onion sets or seeds? I've done both, Michael. I have for years used sets with no problems as long as they're heat treated. This year I'm all seed, and I was seed for last year. Seed is good because they very rarely bolt. Consider the way onions sort of pro, uh, propagate. Okay, you know, they are on a biannual propagation. So the first year they produce the bulb, the second year they produce the seed head. Okay, so a set has been grown into a tiny little bulb and then it's been caused to go dormant. So that onion set is typically thinking it's in its second year when it starts growing. So it's no wonder why they start bolting. The problem is they then put it through a heat treatment to try and prevent the bolting. But it's like anything else. How many people have gone and bought sweet potatoes or potatoes from the store that's been sprayed with an inhibitor to stop it sprouting, and then you've put them in the cupboard and 2 days later it's got chits on it that long, right? You know, the heat treatment doesn't always work. So you then put it out, they get a little bit of stress from heat or lack of water or whatever the case being is, and they turn to seed. You don't get that so much with seeds, okay? So that's, and I think as well, you get a better onion. You get a bigger onion, more flavour, and because you were in control of the growth of that plant all the way through, all right? What's more fulfilling, being a fireman or gardening? I love my job, but gardening, guys. And I'm working really hard to try and do it here with you guys. You know, not I. You know, I can go off and be a gardener for somebody else as a job tomorrow if I wanted to. Okay, you know, and in some quite large gardens, but I don't want to do that for anybody else. I want to garden for myself. But I want to be able to, I enjoy making the content and providing and helping other people and motivating people, you know, to get off their backsides, turn Coronation Street off, and get out into the garden and garden and learn about gardening and things like that. It's so much better for your health. And this week alone, some stats have finally come out proving that firefighters are four times more likely to have cancer and die from it before they even reach their pensionable age. There's all sorts of carcinogens that we're dealing with. We are 5 more times more likely to suffer stresses and things like that. And although it's a really fulfilling job when things go right, it can also be one of the worst jobs when things go wrong. And a lot of times in my sort of profession, things go wrong a lot, and you're dealing with the aftermath. It's like you go to a car crash, and I don't tend to talk about this story, but I went to a car crash in a woods. It's a lane that goes through a local woods, and it was the 28th of December, 3 days after Christmas. 5 family members in the car, and I had to deal with an 8-year-old that had died in that car, who looked identical to Wayne, and that has stuck with me. And those things, they sort of mount up, and it's an accumulation. So you can have something sometimes that is pretty trivial to most people, and then it'll just drag back all these horrible things. So firefighting can be really rewarding, but it can be quite devastating as well. And I want to get to the point where eventually this is all I'm doing, because I absolutely adore making content for you guys. I find it a struggle when I'm in work, because we rain a lot here in Wales, and I know we're way off topic at the moment, but I will finish answering it. It rains a lot here in Wales, and the problem I have is, it can be hammering down with rain for 5 days of the week, and then the 2 days I'm in work is sunny, but I can't film because I'm in work, and then I come home and it's raining again. So it would make life a lot easier. I'd be able to produce a lot more content. I'd be able to help more people, even different formats, because eventually I want to start a podcast as well. You're going to see a lot more out of me this year, because I'm changing the way I'm doing things, creating shorts, but there'll be longer form content as well. We'll still have the 8 to 10 minute videos, but I'll be doing 30 and 40 minute videos that can be cut down into smaller videos as well. So there's lots going to be happening that I've planned for this year, but it's dependent on the weather. So, Jason, to answer your question, I love being a firefighter, but I love gardening and making content much, much more. Right, okay. So, last question, sorry. Are you growing giant vegetables this year? That comes from Michael. Michael, yes, I've got a few leeks in already. I will be doing some giant cucumbers again. I'll be doing some tomatoes. I'll be doing a giant Swede competition with a few other creators. So there'll be a few things, but I don't know if I'll have the space for marrows this year. We'll have a look. I might do a few cabbage. I don't know yet. We'll have a look, see what's going on. Normally I've sown the cabbage by now, though, if I am, but it's still not too late. So, but I will be doing a few things. Okay. I tried to plant a grapevine, but I can't get it to survive successfully. Do you have any tips? Yeah. With grapes, firstly, you need pretty good nutritional soil, and then you need to add loads and loads of drainage to the potting hole. Okay, what a lot of people, they don't like clay soils, and a lot of the soil around here is clay, but what people do is they forget about drainage in the actual in the potting hole, and then they kill them with kindness, because they chuck in loads of compost, which holds water, causes the root system to rot before it's got established. Once the root system's established, I mean, they'll go forever. I mean, my grapevines were planted 8 years ago up on this garden, and the stalk on them. You know, the main trunk is like this on them, on both of them now. You know, and in fact we've actually got 3 at the garden, and I'm looking to take some cuttings off them and start a few others, climbing over some of the well-being gardens and stuff like that to get that going. But good quality compost, but lots of drainage. Don't overfeed initially. Wait for it to go. For the first year, don't cut it back until winter sets in and it's gone dormant, and then just cut it back to the framework you want. And you're doing that, don't let it put out any grapes for 3 years. As soon as you start seeing any grapes forming, cut them off. And on the 3rd year, you can let those grapes go. And I got a really big video actually on growing and pruning grapevines. In fact, there's 2 or 3 of them on the channel. So just put a search in grapes, simplify gardening into YouTube, and you'll find them. Okay. Balicilian allotment man, just trying to save money. Is scaffolding netting fine enough to protect against carrot root fly? No chance. If you want to save money, don't buy netting and raise your carrot boxes above 2 feet from the local soil area around you. Root fly only sort of fly up to around about 18 to 20 inches. So if you get them up sort of table height plus, then you're not going to have to worry about them. But you need veggie, enviromesh, something like that to stop root fly. Scaffolding netting, firstly, it's not fine enough, but secondly, it has those big holes, you know, where they've stitched it together anyway, so they would just get through that. But like I said, sometimes you've got to speculate to accumulate. If you really must net, that would be the one place I would tell you to go and invest in some veggie mesh, just for those carrot beds, because you know those root fly are going to get through there otherwise. All right. Hi Tony, can I still lift and split my rhubarb crowns? Marion, yes you can. Just get onto it pretty much quickly. As soon as they start sprouting, you're going to be pushed to do it after that. I mean, I've got a video on splitting crowns, and when I split them, I did it and they had like their first leaf through. Okay, you can really push it, and in fact the big huge rhubarb plants that I have came from when I split in those videos. I just planted them close to the front of the garden and then moved them the next year to where they are now. But yeah, you can split them now. Just get them done before they really blow out. Allium leaf miner. Yeah, there's loads of ways of controlling allium leaf miner. Again, I've got a full blog post on allium leaf miner on my website, so go across to that and type in allium leaf miner and it'll pull it up for you. But again, with leaf miner, you know, there are all sorts of things you can do. A garlic spray will help. Yellow sticky pads will help. They are really good. Anything yellow, leaf miner's attracted to, so that will really sort of like, you know, pull those, attract them away from the plants. Good airflow is good as well. You know, that will sort it. But get across there, have a look, and that will give you a complete breakdown of all the different types of ways of dealing with it and why each is successful. Okay. All right. How many pallet collars would I say to grow carrots? A pallet collar, I think, is typically about 4 to 6 inches. So if they're 6 inches, you would need 4 or 5 minimum, you know, in height to prevent the carrot fly, you know, hitting the box. But if you're just looking for the depth and you're going to net them, you know, 3 would be plenty to, you know, in height to be able to grow carrots in. Vine weevil. Do you know the biggest issue? Nematodes, right, you've used nematodes and you said they've come back. Yes, they have, okay? And this is the problem with nematodes or the way people use nematodes. They think that it's a one-time deal, and it isn't. Nematodes will last between 4 and 6 weeks, and you have to be constantly renewing those nematodes. But some of the biggest things is to get the pots in your garden checked early on. So if you've got pots and buckets and things in the garden that's got soil in them over winter, get them checked now. And I know, they go down into the soil and everything else. Those you can't deal with, but they tend to like the pots. So if you've got them, get up and get them out of the pots first off. The second thing is really nematodes are your answer, but you have to keep renewing them. It's not a one-time hit thing. This is a consistent watering every 4 to 6 weeks through the growing season. What you need to do is break the breeding cycle, and once you've broken that breeding cycle, you're right. So and the biggest problem a lot of people have is they don't keep that that watering of the nematodes up long enough in order to break that cycle, because once you've broken the cycle, there's not another generation following behind, and then you're golden, right? But that's the easiest way would be to get nematodes, but again, keep it going. And I know they're not cheap, so it's really dependent on your thing. The other option you have would be digging out and stuff, but you miss loads of them anyway because they sink colour as soil half the time, and you're destroying all the microbial life. You've got to be doing it by keeping sure that your plants are strong and healthy, which will stop the vine weevil from from attacking them so much. But the nematodes are really your answer. And I know you said you've tried them, but you've got to consistently use that. And then through the winter you won't need to, but as soon as spring starts coming in, you want to get those nematodes. They need around about 14 to 16 degrees soil temperature for it to really be effective. So hold off until the soil's at that, but as soon as the soil hits that sort of temperature, then start slamming the nematodes in. All right. Okay. I grow in pots in my garden as I only have a patio and decked area. Would like to use my Dalek compost bin, but unsure where to put it or if I can use it at all. What would you suggest? Okay. So your Dalek bin can sit on top of your patio, firstly. It's not a problem. Okay. Worms will find their way in. And if any of you have seen worms in, on patios in winter when it's wet and stuff, if it's been wet, they'll literally come across the concrete and they'll find their way in there, okay? More often than not, though, you could add just a little bit of, soil from a worm bin or something like that. It'll probably be plastered in worm eggs and inoculated if you wanted to do that, okay? But yeah, I mean, the Dalek compost bin is not a problem. What I would suggest with that is put it somewhere that's not too close to a fence or a shed or something like that, because otherwise what that can do is create rat runs and allow vermin, to be there, because they have an area they can escape. But if you've got it out more towards the open a little bit, or where there's not so easy for them to have a rat run, then you won't have a problem at all with it. And I'd suggest cutting things up quite fine with these Dalek bins, because they don't have the volume in order to create the heat. But you can certainly compost even if it's a cold compost in them. Best crop to follow after brassicas. I tend to put in things like, legumes. So your peas, your beans and things like that, because brassicas are hungry plants and they'll pull loads of nitrogen out because of the leaf growth, okay? And the legumes will help to fixate nitrogen back into the soil. So I would tend to follow with legumes. Can we get cattle panels, welded mesh to form arches for growing? We're in southeast Wales, having problems finding anything online. Yeah, cattle panels are difficult. You'd need to go to like some farm shop for them. They're not going to be cheap. What a lot of people have been using is concrete mesh. For when they use reinforcing mesh, they've been using those. It really depends how strong you want it. Or here we tend to have like cattle wire that's in a big roll. I've used that, but it's not as strong as a cattle panel. So it really depends. If you're putting it between a good structure, then the cattle panel wire will be fine. It's in a big roll, 4x4 inch squares. In fact, you'll see it on one of the videos for the potatoes when I first built the support system for the potato homes. So that's that sort of stuff, and you can get that from most good farm stores, so they'll sell that there. Would figs grow okay in southwest England, and if so, what advice can you give cutting or seed garden shop bought plants? Right, okay, figs grow fine here. I've got 3 in the tunnel at the moment. Because my garden is very windy over winter, I was losing the fruit that it sets the year before. So how figs work is they put out small versions of the fruit, like a bud form, and that sits on the plant over winter, and then they finish growing that. And because I was so open here, the figs were being killed off before they had a chance to grow. I've put them in my tunnel now, and they're growing fine. So yes, you can grow them, no problem in England. Now, again, with figs, you can graft with scion wood. So if you know someone that's got a really good variety, you can just get a standard fig and graft it, or you can go and get a fig from your garden centre or whatever. They don't tend to come true to seed, so I would stay away from seed, and I'd go and literally buy a fig plant and then I'd graft to it with the chosen variety I wanted. Protecting cabbages, etc. from caterpillars. Right, okay, so there's a couple of ways. Firstly, netting. Okay, it's a pretty easy way of doing it. Another way would be to use a product called SB Plant Invigorator. And it's a soap solution. It's organic, and you put like 1 ml in a litre of water and you spray the plants with this. And basically what this stuff does, it basically turns the cabbage bitter, and you need to stop using this then a week or 2 before harvesting. But what it does, it turns the surface of the leaf bitter, and the cabbage butterfly caterpillars don't actually like it. There is also Bacillus thurensis you can spray, which is causes the caterpillars to actually, they eat and then they starve themselves because they stop eating. So initially they're eating your plant, but then they stop feeding afterwards, and then they literally die within a few days, and that's really good news. But that's something else again, you need to spray it quite regular. So BT you can buy pretty much anywhere. I've got a big tub of it, and I'm putting just a few granules in some water, dissolving that, and I'm spraying that then with my cabbage. So there's 3 different ways there. What's the best mesh for covering greens? Pretty much any mesh that's going to stop a butterfly. Scaffolding netting will work, but you've got to sew those little holes that are in there together. So you'll see with scaffolding netting, there's a line every sort of like 2 feet or something of tiny little holes. And I've seen butterflies actually walking the net and climbing through those. And then, of course, they're trapped inside then, laying eggs everywhere. So you've got to sew them up. But that's cheap. As long as it's small enough to stop a butterfly, you're fine. So KP, speaking of chickens, how much are you paying for eggs? There we're up to $8. Eggs here are expensive. I think they're about between £3 and £4 a dozen. I don't buy eggs. I've got my own poultry, so all my eggs are. I've got 9 birds now, but I used to have 51 hens, 3 cockerels and 9 ducks, but I've scaled that back to just 9 hens when I moved to this garden. So, and that's doing more than keeping us, even like today I pulled 7 eggs out of there, so, it's more than keeping us going. So I've already asked Computer Froze where to buy welded mesh, aka cattle panels. Yeah, again, we've answered that. You can't really get it here, but you can get cattle wire from most good farm stores, okay? And just wind the video back and you'll see the whole answer for that. I've bought my potato seeds but don't want to chit them yet. Can I wrap in newspaper and shove away from? No. Pam, once they have been... Right, so how they store potatoes is they put them in a cold store. Once they've been brought out of that cold store, that potato started growing and you won't stop it, okay? So the best thing you can do for that potato is to chit it. And if you put it in a really bright but cool place, you can chit that for months, okay? You'll still only have little small stubby shoots on it. And the potatoes may even start to shrivel and stuff, but people worry about this. But what you have to understand is the potato itself is designed as a food store to produce a chit or a sprout, okay? Once the sprout is developed, you can snap that off and grow your plant. You don't even need the potato after that. So with the potato shriveling isn't a problem as long as you've got those chits, okay? So so don't worry about what they like. Keep them cool, keep them bright, and they'll sit there for months and months until you're ready to sow them. And I think that was the last question in there, guys. So I just want to sort of finish up now because we're like nearly an hour and a half. Let's turn that off. You know, consider getting your garden ready. Clean off all the beds. Do your soil tests. Think about how you're going to amend it, whether it's compost and where you're going to get that from, whether you've made your own. Yeah. Consider getting your support structures in early. Yeah. All of these jobs are designed to make your life easier later. Consider mulching everything that you're gonna, and then plant through the mulch. Consider cleaning the greenhouses and this sort of thing just to make your life easier and get that light in. Look at where you're going to put in all of your water systems if you haven't got them ready, and how you're going to water. If you're going to water with cans, is it worth bringing in like a 45-gallon drum into the greenhouse so that you can fill that up? Number one, it saves you walking to your water source, but it also warms that water for early spring. So, you know, there's lots of little things that we can be doing in the garden. We can be pruning back the grapevines and the bushes that need it, the fruit trees that needed it that we haven't got to yet. You know, all of this stuff. You know, hoeing off all the beds and getting that good compost layer down ready for sowing. Renewing the paths, you know, if you've got wood chip paths, you know, they break down, so get a new layer of that. All the stuff that you can do now while it's cold is going to make your life and your garden better come spring, summer and autumn, all right? So with that, guys, I just want to thank you for joining me for this live stream. I know there's been no guest here, and it's been quite nice actually to be able to talk to you guys, answer your questions myself, and have a chat. Like I said, things are going to change a little bit on the channel as far as the way I'm producing content, only so that I can be more consistent, give you a lot more. Some of you have noticed that there's been a short video out every single day this year so far. You know, so there'll be lots of shorts. There'll be the normal length content as well. There'll be live streams. There'll be video podcasts. There'll be long form content. There'll be all sorts of stuff. So the channel's just gonna be all about gardening, but all across the board. And some people are not going to like it. I've had some leave already, but that's their choice. It's just the way I need to do things in order to bring you good quality content and make my life easier as far as producing that. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed our time together again. And this is why I like doing these live streams, because it allows me to have that connection, because trying to answer 1,500 comments a day is just not possible anymore. But I can come here, I can answer your questions, you know, have that bit of personal time with you guys and relate, and maybe answering some of the personal stuff like we were asked earlier on about whether I like firefighting or gardening more. You know, I'm not against answering stuff like that. Maybe we'll do just a dedicated live stream for that one day. I don't know. But thank you again for that. Thank you for all the support and everything. And I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.